January 9th, 2022. The morning opens like any other. News tickers scroll, analysts sip coffee, satellites trace silent arcs above. Then, the alerts begin to blink red. One domain times out, then another, and within minutes, the outward face of a nation vanishes. North Korea's foreign-facing websites stop answering, state news portals go dark, and diplomatic contact addresses simply refuse to respond. For watchers of anomalies, the pattern reads like a coordinated outage. For the rest of the world, it feels impossibly dramatic. Theories bloom instantly: retaliation for missile tests, a covert strike by a rival state, or a deliberate internal severing. No one guesses the truth. A single researcher, at home in pajamas, watching packets carve a hole through a secretive kingdom. He calls himself P4X, pronounced PAX, and he had been a researcher long enough to know the blunt difference between curiosity and danger. When a year earlier, an apparently ordinary file landed in his inbox, he received it and opened it in the secure environment he trusted. And when the warning from a major security firm arrived the next morning, a bulletin about booby-trapped tools targeting researchers, it became clear that the file had carried a doorway intended to reach inside his work. That discovery didn't feel abstract. It landed like a personal violation. Someone had aimed a state's tradecraft at him, and the authorities who took his statement offered condolences and then silence. Weeks became months. No follow-up came. The absence of protection hardened into a decision. If no institution would strike back for him, he would strike on his own. Blueprint of a fragile net. He begins, as all careful attackers must, by looking first and planning second. He maps the kingdom's few visible edges, cataloging domains and noting how the outward infrastructure leans on outdated software and brittle configurations. Where modern nations disperse their assets across vast clouds and distributed services, North Korea's external presence is compact. Only a handful of networks, a small number of public servers, and software versions that bear known scars from years-old advisories. Seeing that, he realizes the problem is not genius-level 0 days, but simple neglect. The systems are not fortified so much as forgotten. He writes automated scanners that catalog reachable hosts, and he watches the logs those scans produce until timing and pattern become second nature. He researches how long maintenance windows last when administrators log in, and which services are backed up strictly by habit rather than robust design. In his mind, he assembles a plan that will be symbolic and visible. Not a silent infiltration to steal secrets, but a public humiliation that exposes fragility. Practice runs against benign mirrors teach him that a malformed request here, a repeated pressure there, can cascade into a collapse. Rehearsal gives him confidence, but also keeps his intent surgical. He wants humiliation and exposure, not civilian harm. And that ethical line shapes which systems he will strike and which he will avoid. As weeks pass, the architecture of his operation takes shape. Rented cloud instances to obscure origins, scripted sequences to probe and then overload weak services, and pacing rules that exploit human rhythms. Hours when support desks sleep, weekends when confirmations sit unread. He tunes these sequences until the automation becomes steady and predictable. When the moment arrives, his actions will be fast, decisive, and deniable. The work of one person executed with the scale of many. The night the kingdom went dark. He sits alone in the dim light of his apartment, pajama pants soft at the knees, a half-drunk mug at his elbow, and for a moment the whole thing looks absurdly domestic. He runs one last check and, confident in the rehearsal, hits enter, launching a chain of scripts that thread outward through rented servers and proxies, each one scripted to probe, to find, and to pressure the most fragile points. The first hosts begin to cough, web servers stop responding to requests, mail gateways fail authentication attempts, official portals return blank pages. The map on his monitor begins to crumble into red. He does not jump up and shout. He watches methodically as battered services fall. Air Koryo's booking page, the state portal, the main propaganda outlet, each becomes unreachable in turn. Independent uptime monitors corroborate the collapse. Charts flash red across dashboards in Singapore, Seoul, and Washington. Analysts exchange terse messages, and press teams draft pieces that reach for grand narratives, imagining statecraft where there was only a man with a reason. He watches on a second screen as pundits invent entire operations while he sits with his feet up and a movie playing on mute, verifying each outage with a quiet, private satisfaction. When dawn arrives and the outward-facing nodes are mostly dark, he allows himself a breath that tightens into a different feeling. The success is complete, but success has a sound like a siren that might summon consequences. He realizes he has embarrassed a regime with nuclear capabilities and a brutal intelligence apparatus, and that thought moves quickly from thrill toward concern. The moment of victory is already edged with the risk that someone sharper and better funded will seek to trace the pattern back to him. The world starts guessing. As the news cycle catches up, the misattribution begins to bloom. Experts and officials, grasping for frameworks that make sense, reach for state-level explanations. Strikes like this, they say, are the province of nation-states, not individuals. Commentary leans into politics. Is it a warning for missile tests, a diplomatic message coded in outages? Newsrooms replay satellite imagery and missile trajectories. Analysts argue about proportional responses. The guesses multiply because the elegant answer, one person acting out of grievance, is too simple for a geopolitics that prefers complexity. Inside North Korea, the human impact is narrow but sharp. Most citizens never touch the global internet. Their domestic intranet hums along, unaware. The outage bites the elites who depend on external channels, propagandists, diplomats, and the machinery that pushes the regime's voice outward. Image matters to autocracies as much as guns do, and the sudden silence is, to those who run the show, a public embarrassment. For outsiders, it becomes a spectacle, a secretive nation shown vulnerable in plain view. Investigations begin, as they always do, with careful traces and frantic triage. Defensive teams trace traffic, apply patches, and reroute services. Intelligence branches debate whether this is a narrow act of hacktivism or the tip of a broader operation. Within the security community, a split appears. Some praise the demonstration as a way to hold regimes to account without bloodshed. Others warn that noisy vigilante acts can disrupt classified operations and risk dangerous escalation. He watches the debates from the quiet of his apartment and feels a complicated pride. His action forced a public conversation about power and fragility, but it also raised the specter of unintended consequences. Months later, he takes the next step that he had already imagined. He launches a modest dark web hub calling itself the Funk Project, a blunt rallying cry designed to gather sympathetic operators without becoming an army. The manifesto is minimalist. Expose the regime's hypocrisy, focus on reputational pressure, avoid civilian harm. Some answer the call with curiosity, others hang back, fearful of legal risk and the prospect of being targeted themselves. The project becomes a whisper rather than a roar, an embodiment of his hope that a few principled actions could change the narrative without igniting a wider conflict. The practical outcomes are patchy. North Korea hardens some outward configurations, engineers tighten certificates, administrators change processes that had long been neglected. Intelligence services widen their monitoring for small actors who can create outsized chaos. Policy papers cite the outage as a warning. Distributed power can bypass traditional deterrence. The ladder of escalation now has extra rungs for lone actors. Banks, hospitals, and other sensitive sectors watch closely, wondering what a world with more people who have motive and skill might look like. For him, the act is never purely triumphant. It is a point on a line that curves toward ambiguity. He has shown something important, that a person can make a regime blink, but he also realizes that provocation begets reaction, and reaction can be unpredictable. The ethical calculus that once felt straightforward now lodges questions in his chest. Who has the right to prosecute geopolitical change from a bedroom? What are the lines between protest and provocation, between symbolic pressure and dangerous escalation? He continues to monitor, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of caution. The networks he once struck return to life in patched and fragile forms. The world files the episode among lessons learned. Improve redundancy, monitor the small external surfaces, and never underestimate the human motive. In the quiet moments, he acknowledges the loneliness of anonymity. He is not lauded nor legally pursued. Instead, he carries the private knowledge that his action nudged a global conversation forward, and that knowledge feels both like power and like weight. Sometimes he catches himself imagining alternate outcomes. If he had not acted, would the same vulnerabilities still be exploited by worse actors? If he had been traced and punished, would the outrage have reshaped policy in a different way? The answers are unsatisfying because they are hypothetical. What remains is the fact. The outage happened, the world debated, systems hardened, and a man in pajamas proved a point others had only theorized. The final image that stays with him is small and domestic. The glow of a monitor reflected against window glass as city lights blink below, and his own handle, P4X, glowing in the corner of a screen. A tiny sigil of a choice that rippled wider than he had ever expected. He whispers to the empty room, more to himself than to any audience. I wanted them to know they could bleed. I wanted someone to notice. Outside, the world keeps turning, and somewhere the patch servers stand like timid sentinels. The precedent lingers, and the question remains for everyone who watches: who else will decide to act when they believe institutions will not?